Hi, I'm Julie Blair, and you're with me here again today for another segment of Living in Forgiveness. And you know, throughout this week, I've just been really wondering a few things about the purpose of things. Do you ever just do that? Wonder, what's the purpose of this, or what's the purpose of that? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? And as I started looking at how that applies to all the things that I do on a daily basis, but also in my walk with Jesus, I started wondering, what's the purpose of forgiveness? We're told to do it. Oh, you need to forgive them when they're not nice to you, and forgive and forgive. So we've heard the message, but what's the purpose behind it? And I often find that for me, when I know the purpose of why I'm doing something, it makes what I'm doing easier and that I have a better understanding of it. When somebody tells me, just do this way, and I don't quite understand why, then I spend more time trying to figure out, why do I need to do this and what for? And so I ask you, what's the purpose of forgiveness? Have you ever even thought about it? You know, when I started looking at in the scripture, I found so many references in so many different places that my mind was just flooded with all these things and all the stories and all the people who've come and gone before us that probably may have had the same question. What was their journey like? What was the purpose of anything? And I don't want to get into what's the purpose of life and all that. I just want to focus on the purpose of forgiveness. And here today, the first thing that I found is probably the most important component that I think that we as a society and church miss is to become like Christ. Really that simple. Look at what He did on behalf of us. So, you know, when we talk about following in Christ's footsteps and to become like Christ, what exactly does that mean? And that too is a big question that when we look at that, a lot of times people start to follow Christ and then they're told, well, you know what, you're a follower of Christ, you got to look like this, wear your hair like this, or like this real long, and you have to dress like this, and your heels should be this high and not this high, and you should not talk like that, and you should talk like this, and you should drive like this, and you should live here because you are now a believer. And so this is your purpose. You need to look like this if you're going to follow Christ. Well, it's quite interesting when we really start to look at people and how many people there are that follow Christ that yet are not looking alike. And for me, that was a trap that I fell into because maybe you're like me where you had people that were telling you had to look a certain way, walk a certain way, talk a certain way, dress a certain way, behave a certain way, without really recognizing that as you grow in Christ and understand more about Him, that all those things will change, that somebody molding you into what they think you should look like doesn't really ever work because you're going to spend more time trying to look like what someone else molded you into and less of what Christ created you to look and be and feel and act like. So when we look at this as becoming like Christ, and for each one of us, we're going to be able to demonstrate that in exactly the ways that Jesus did, and that's where the fruit will be. It's not in how you look, it's in how you behave, the issues of the heart, what's coming out of you that will demonstrate that love. When we look at Romans 12:2, you know, I really love this verse for so many reasons, but it tells us, do not conform to the pattern of this world. That's first a clue, do not do so. So if you have, it's time to unconform yourself, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So we got to start looking and thinking, behaving different according to the Word. So if your life is not living according to the Word or representation of the Word is not going to change so you can feel better about where you're going. Okay? We have got it backwards. Well, I don't really, that's not for today. No, I don't believe in that. That died with the dinosaurs all those years ago. Well, that's not what the Word says. We need to be looking at aligning our lives so we're not conforming to the ways that we need not conform to. And if you don't know the ways you need not conform to, it's time to get in the Word so that way you won't fall into the trap of conforming to the patterns of the world. So then it says we're going to be working on transforming and being renewed to the mind. Then, next step, as I've said before, you will be able to attest and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So part of that is living a lifestyle of forgiveness. It is pleasing to Him when we live in forgiveness. Why? Because it demonstrates the love that we have for others and for Him, which I'll get to in a couple minutes. Romans 5:19 tells us, "For just as though or through the disobedience of one man the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of one man many will be made righteous." Now, think about that for a moment. We can compare Adam and Jesus. Which one are you walking like today? Where are you leading those that are following you? You may have 15,000 Twitter followers or any other social media friends and all this stuff, but where are you leading them? And that's a very big question to ask, because if we are trying to influence people in the direction of the Lord, but yet we are not yet following that ourselves, where are we going to be leading people? And so just as through that act of disobedience or the act of obedience is still your choice. You can forgive and lead people, or you can not forgive, reject people, and then wonder why they're where they're at. And I know that I've said before that when we look at where we're at and where we're going, well, what is it that we're leading people to become? You know, if you're a parent, the thing that you also want to take a look at is what you think and say about your children is what they will become. So if there's unforgiveness there, where are we leading our children? Where are we leading future generations? And we have a choice. Are we going to be like Adam, or are we going to be like Jesus? So if we want to look at the overall purpose of forgiveness, the first one is to become like Christ. There is no other way to become like Him than to clean out the gunk in our hearts and walk in forgiveness. And I'm going to be taking you all over the Word today, because there's really no better way to learn this stuff than to get into it. And if you don't want to get into it, I'll just bring it right to you all on the platter, so that way you will hear it, and then you can go and get more in there as your heart for Him changes. 1 John 2:6, "The one who abides in Him ought walk in the same manner as He walked." Okay, so let me say that again. The one who abides in Him ought himself to walk in the same manner as He walked. There again, purpose of forgiveness is to become like Christ. And if we want to make our lives Christ-like, that means we need to be walking in forgiveness. And you may say, well, you know what, I'm doing all that. But if there's unforgiveness in your heart, then you really aren't. And I'm going to challenge you today to really look at that. Am I doing all of what I need to be a believer in Christ? You may say you are, but let me ask you this. If you were put on trial today, for being a Christian or a believer or a follower, whichever word you want to use, is there enough evidence to convict you? Good question, isn't it? Reflect real carefully before you say, oh yeah, holla. Think about that. If you were convicted today for being a Christian, is there enough evidence to convict you? And if you don't know, that's at least better than saying yes and being deceived in your mind. So you want to think about that question, hold it dear to you, so that way you can always reflect, would I be convicted? I wonder. What would I be convicted of if I say I'm a believer? Or maybe I'm really not, but there's no evidence of that. Well, if you're not, there is evidence, and there is evidence to support otherwise. So we really want to be looking at this. If I'm going to be a believer and I want to follow Him, I really need to grasp the purpose of forgiveness. Now, you know, it's real tempting to not walk in forgiveness. But see, Jesus was tempted, and He still did it. And you know what? The Bible also tells us that we will do many things and greater things than He. So if we're not even doing the bare minimum of what He did, how are we going to do greater things? It's kind of a challenge, right? Oh, well, I'm not even doing the basic foundation of forgiving, but yet I think I'm going to get bigger blessings just because I'm so great. So when we look at that, we really need to be taking a look and recognize Jesus was tempted in His day. He had to walk out His purpose just like every single one of us. I have to walk out my purpose, you have to walk out yours. And if you say, you know, I don't yet know what that is, you may cling on to Jeremiah 29:11. God has a purpose for me, not to harm and hope for a future. That is correct. But here's the thing. It's one thing to know that there's a purpose for you, and another thing to know what it is. I can tell you there's $1 million right across the street from you, but what good is it going to do you to know that if you don't know how to go and get it? or if you don't know what you need to be doing in order to get there. So 1 Corinthians 10:13 tells us, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. So we see Jesus had his temptation. He kept walking. We're to become like him. Guess what? We keep walking. He walked in forgiveness. He kept going towards the bigger purpose, the bigger call for his life. The purpose of forgiveness has many, many, many components to it, but he kept walking. He kept forgiving. People wanted to kill him all the time. People didn't like him. People loved him. That may be you. Why? Because you're carrying his message. So when you were looking at that, the temptation is not abnormal. I hear many people say, oh, the enemy's coming after me again. Why? If you're following him and you're focused on him, you should not have to be playing around with all this other stuff, because guess what? It's going to be a distraction, and you already have every single thing that you need to not be bothered with temptation in the first place. Is it difficult? Absolutely. But as I've said before, walking in forgiveness is a discipline. Living in forgiveness is a discipline just as much so as being a jerk is a discipline. You just happen to discipline yourself in all of the wrong things. So when we're looking at this, we're no different in the term that Jesus had temptation. He walked in forgiveness. We are called to do the same. But you see, here's where we're at today. Romans 1:21 is pretty clear. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their hearts foolish were darkened, or their foolish hearts were darkened. Look at where we're at today. We have major problems in our world, in our society, in our states, in our cities, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our homes, and yet people are shunning God. Quite fascinating, really. We think, oh, I got this forgiveness thing. I got it. I forgave 35 years ago. And then you bring up that time when your husband did this or that, and you got to remind him every year on the anniversary of what he didn't get you, that you think you should have had back then when he was doing everything he could to support the family, so on and so forth. And when we really look at this, our hearts are darkened. And if we are walking with foolish hearts that are dark, what message are we carrying? You cannot walk in the light with your dimmer switch on. Boop, it doesn't quite work. It's hard to see where you're going. How can people follow you, and where's the light? So when we are looking at this, Romans 1:21 is very telling of where we're at. Foolish, hearts darkened. We know of him, we've heard of him, but I think I'll just let the universe do all of what the universe is going to do, even though I have no knowledge of how the universe works in relationship to me. So I'll just stick some things out there, even though it's really the God of all creation that created that universe. But you see, you can't sidestep the order that God has created and think that you're going to get the full reward. So when we really look at this, it's a serious thing we need to be focusing on. There is but one God that created the universe. There is one Jesus that died for your sins so that you could walk in freedom. And you can't just bystep him to make your way up. It's kind of like denying all the people that you work with, and all your supervisors just go straight to the CEO to state your claim. And he may say, who are you? That'd be a sad day, right? You wouldn't want to do that. And Matthew 7:21 also tells us that. But in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creature. The old things have passed away. Behold, new things have come. So guess what, folks? If you are a follower of Christ and you're walking in forgiveness and you understand the purpose of forgiveness is to follow Christ, you will become a new creature through that. Now, how great is that you get to become renewed in spirit, in heart, in wealth, in every area of your life as you make the choice to forgive. You think it's hard? Sure it is. But guess what? With every step that you do it, the more of who you were created to be will come out. And so we might say, hey, will the real you please stand up? Please stand up. Because we need to be standing up, stepping out, and taking hold of the word so that way we know what it is and that we can live it and live out the full purpose of our lives and the call on them, but also through forgiveness so that way we can help others as well. So another purpose of forgiveness, or another thing that Jesus did, was he lived a life of forgiveness. I mean, there's just no better example of that. In previous segments, I've talked about the prodigal son and how forgiving that father was, and we know that's a massive story. And when we look at all the other people in the Bible who are forgiven and they've had their experiences and freedom of that, but Jesus died for you. And you may not believe that, but it's true. Whether or not you believe it doesn't change the truth from being what it is. And a lot of times we get so caught, well, I don't believe that. That's not true. No, in our ignorant minds, we just aren't understanding that the truth is the truth, regardless of whether or not you like it, believe it, or accept it. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, whether or not you like it or believe it. So nothing about him changes. He walked in total forgiveness. And if you're going to claim to be a Christian, you better be doing that same exact thing. Now, is this going to be hell and brimstone? No, but I'm wanting to be a little candid here today because it's something that needs to be said because we're hurting. We have a nation full of hurting people. We have a world full of hurting people that are too much playing a victim instead of a victor. And we have got to get the fact that freedom reigns in forgiveness and freedom reigns in following Christ. If you don't yet know him and you're like, what are you talking about? What is this Jesus stuff? You know what? He's the center of my life, and I'm just going to hold to you today, say, you know what? Let him become the center of your life. There is no greater choice that you can make than that. And I wouldn't be standing here before you today if I hadn't done that. I didn't know what it meant many, many, many years ago. I just knew when I was 5 and when I asked Jesus to be the center of my life, to be an escape for me. I didn't really know who he was or what that was about, but I always knew from that point forward that there was someone walking with me. And you know what? It's good to have someone walk with you when you're going through the tough times that nobody understands. And so I ask you today, if you say you're a believer, does your life reflect the thankfulness of what he did for you? And if it doesn't, what can you do today to say thank you? Thank you that you died on that cross for me. Thank you that regardless of the mistakes I make, that you love me more than that. You know, he loves you more than the mistakes you make. And a lot of times we end up spending more time focusing on the mistakes that we make and the mistakes that others make instead of the love that he has for us. And that's where when you start walking in love and forgiveness and see the purpose behind it, you'll start to be free. You'll start to walk stronger with every single step that you take. And that is my prayer and my hope for you today. Because through that, guess what you're demonstrating? You're demonstrating love. Jesus is love. The purpose of him is love. He came to set the captives free. Not free so we can walk around and you can just laugh at us all over. Oh, look at these crazy people on the earth. They just don't know what they're doing, which we probably don't. We're all probably a little bit crazy, some of us, more than others. But it's walking in love that we need to recognize. And the purpose of forgiveness is demonstrating that love. How much love are you demonstrating? You know, Romans 5:8 tells us, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Could you imagine if he said, no, you sinned too much, I'm not going on that cross for you? Just not going to do it. Could you imagine being a parent or a child and, no, son, you wrecked the family car. Nope, don't come home. Nope. You did this, it's too much. I am not going to take on any of that for you. Where would any of us be if Jesus thought so little of us? And it's when we demonstrate love for others that we get over ourselves to show others that they're worthy, that they're valuable, that they're needed, that they have a purpose too. You know, it's a funny thing. In Ephesians 5:12, it tells us, therefore, be imitators of God. Right there. So very simple, right? As beloved children, and walk in love. It's really that simple. The purpose of forgiveness is to demonstrate our walk in love, to become Christ-like, to just love others right where they are. And is that a challenge? Yes. I always wanted everybody to be where I was, and if they weren't, I wasn't riding that bus. Nope. Didn't want to. But you see, as we start to really look and embrace others for where they're at, they're on their journey. And aren't you on yours? People may not be where you want them to be, but guess what? You loving them is more about them than about you. So it tells us in walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us. He gave himself up for you. That's how much he loves you. An offering and a sacrifice to God is a fragrant aroma. How wonderful is that, that there is someone who would go before us to demonstrate the love that he turned around and gave to us. And if you're a parent, you probably see that more than those who aren't yet parents.